Yeah, we'll definitely do a Q&A at the end. So if you guys have questions, kind of keep them in the back of your mind. You can jot them down, and we'll go over everything after.
Awesome. I will not tell you too much about him. I'll let you guys listen to him. You guys hear me talk enough, which is so fun. So I will turn the floor over to Justin. Thank you again for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with everybody. So I do, or at least I started doing, a lot of what you guys are studying to do. So I work with clients, I run a gym. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And one thing that I found out about working with individuals from a physical standpoint is that there's so much more there if we want to be effective at what we do. And you guys are in a unique position where you get to essentially, and I always say this and people kind of look at me in a weird way, but we get to experiment on human beings, not in a creepy way, but your lab is the gym. You get to watch people move, you get to watch people do things. And the human being as an entity is one of the most complex things that we can interact with. There are so many variables there. And there are a lot of things that we can do to affect change from a physical standpoint, but the mind controls everything. So what I want you to think about, right, in class you guys are learning about a bunch of different tools that you can put in your toolbox, different ways to assess people, different ways to screen people, different ways to positively impact people's lives in a physical way. You learn all these tools and how to apply them in different situations. And the fun part is kind of figuring out which tool to use in which scenario. But what I want to talk to you guys today about is the actual toolbox. Meaning, if we don't understand how the mind interrelates with all these things, then it's very difficult to fully affect somebody in a positive way. So I want to talk a little bit first by telling you who I am. So why are you listening to some random guy up here talking to you? I grew up probably the farthest thing from a natural athlete that you can be. I hated being outside. I hated sports. I played a lot of video games. My mom made me play sports when I was a kid to at least try them. And so I started with soccer, and I decided that I wanted to be a goalie, not because I wanted the pressure on my shoulders or I wanted to make a game-winning save, but when I was watching soccer, I was like, man, that guy is running the least out of everybody. I want to do that, right? So I grew up not being very successful in that realm. I started wrestling when I was in 5th grade, and I received an unceremonial ass-kicking every single day of practice for 2 years. I got to 6th grade, I was still losing, I was getting beat up every day. I hated it, I was getting tossed around, and I wanted to quit. And fortunately, there were people in my life who would not allow me to do that. And my mom and her boyfriend at the time were actually competitive bodybuilders. My mom could kick my ass when I was a kid. And they actually brought me into the gym, and they taught me how to work out. They taught me how to lift weights. They taught me how to do this type of stuff that you guys are learning now. And that kind of changed my life in a way that I wouldn't really understand at the time. But I started to understand and learn firsthand that the more hard work I put in, the better the end result was. Meaning that the harder I pushed myself in training, the more that I actually prepared for the season, the more that I made it hurt at the beginning of the season, the end result was always better. And this was the first time in my life that I had a tangible experience like that. And it started to get the wheels turning, it started to get me thinking. I went to Boston College, I graduated with a degree in chemistry and math. I love science, which is part of what drew me to this. But I had the conversation with my mom, which hopefully none of you would ever have to have this one, but I sat my mom down at the table. I said, you know, I know we were talking about applying to grad schools and all this other stuff, and I know I just got a chemistry degree, but I met this guy and he's opening a gym in Boston, and I think that's what I'm going to do. And at first, she wasn't super thrilled about it. But what you guys are learning is all science, and it's all the same way of thinking. And so I found this unique opportunity to work with people and affect people's lives in a positive way. And so I now I'm the head coach at Invictus Boston in downtown Boston. I went from being that kid who got tossed around at wrestling practice to qualifying for the Meet of Champions at the end of high school. I've competed at the CrossFit Games. I've done a lot of stuff since then. And all of that happens because of this stuff that I'm about to talk to you guys about. So I'm not telling you my story to sit here and say, oh, I did all this stuff. That doesn't matter. What matters is the how that happened. And so why would we talk about mindset development? And we'll talk about what it is, right? The brain controls the body in a way that it's really difficult to understand unless you study this. So there's a book by this author, Eric Vance, called Suggestible You. And the subject of the book is, a big part of it, he talks about the placebo effect, or why certain drugs that aren't actually drugs actually have a positive effect in curing diseases or healing people of certain ailments. And most of the time, the things that these placebos cure are pain-related symptoms or neurological things. They actually had a guy who had Parkinson's disease, go in. He was in a wheelchair. He couldn't walk. And they gave him a placebo pill and ran an experiment. And he literally got up out of his wheelchair and sprinted up the stairs to the waiting area to talk with the doctors. And there's a reason that these placebos work. Our brain can actually create chemical changes in our body, can influence the way that our body reacts to certain situations. So what we think about, or the thoughts that run through our mind on a regular basis, have the ability to influence our actions or our physical responses, both positive and negative. And so if you guys can get a better understanding of that, not only will it affect your life in a positive way, but if you're working with a client down the road, and I'll tell you some stories a little bit later on, when you're working with somebody, the physical component is only one piece of this. It's one slice of the pie, if you will. And there's so much more there and so many other ways that we can positively affect people's lives. Because at the end of the day, that's the best part of this job, is being able to work with somebody who either has no confidence or is massively overweight, or somebody who is partially crippled from some type of physical ailment. And you're able to create a positive change there. And so what is mindset development? Mindset development boils down to essentially three categories that I'm going to talk to you about today. There are a million other things and other pieces to this, but we're going to talk about three major things. We're going to talk about awareness, goal setting, and discipline. And kind of the discipline is going to be the most important thing here, and we'll talk about how that ties into everything else. But let's start with awareness. How many of you are aware of your thoughts on a regular basis? And I'll follow it up with this, right? How many of you are aware of how we react to situations, right? Like, so what happens when somebody cuts you off when you're driving, right? We all have that situation, right? What happens when you fail to meet expectations, or you get an exam back and you didn't do quite as well as you want, all right? What happens when somebody in your life tells you that you can't do something, or that something you want to accomplish is impossible? How you react to those situations says a lot about whether or not you're ultimately going to be successful. And a lot of times we don't necessarily think about how we're reacting, right? But if somebody says, oh, you can't do this, or you won't ever be able to accomplish this, or you won't be able to do that, there are countless times in history where if you listen to that and you say, yeah, I agree with that, they're right, I won't be able to do this, the end result is that you achieve what you believe. Now, if we talk about the flip side of this, and you actually are able to take those situations and you're able to flip that in a positive direction, and you're able to push back against that and resist that, then the outcome or the end result tends to be more positive. And there's another book called The Miracle of Mindfulness by a Vietnamese monk named Thich Nhat Hanh. And he talks about awareness in a really interesting way. So if you are only thinking about the end result of something that you're doing, or you're thinking about the reward, meaning if you're doing some task because you want what the end result is, you're chasing the result, not the action. And this is actually an important thing to think about with training, when you're writing training plans for people. If all they're worried about is the end result, or if somebody's, for the nutrition people in here, if all somebody is worried about is the end result of that diet or that nutrition plan, and they're not worried about they're not concerned about the lifestyle changes that go into it, then they're going to be much more likely to fail long term. So in The Miracle of Mindfulness, he uses the analogy, or tells the story of washing the dishes. And so the whole book is actually written as a series of letters to some of the other monks in the area. And he talks about when you're washing the dishes to enjoy the tea, meaning if you're just trying to wash the cup to enjoy the tea afterwards, and you're not present for the actual washing of the dishes, you're not just enjoying it for what it is or in that moment. By the time you get to the reward, by the time you drink the tea, you're not going to enjoy that either, because you're going to be thinking about the next thing after that. And so part of awareness is understanding to be present in the moment. When it comes to actually working with clients, a lot of this just boils down to listening, not thinking about your response or what you're going to say back to somebody, but actually trying to understand what that person is going through, what their experience is, and actually trying to understand the things that they need from you. Now, once you become aware of your situation, what you'll find is that there are certain things in your life that you're happy with, there are certain things in your life that you want to change. When we talk about actually changing things or making positive change, our vessel for that, or our tool for that, is goal setting. I like using the analogy of, let's say you're driving somewhere, you don't know where you're going. If you don't actually put a destination in your GPS, it's not going to direct you to go anywhere, right? If you don't actually put in the location that you're heading to. You're not going to get any directions there. Goal setting is kind of like that GPS for your life. It allows you to put into context the things that you want to accomplish and how you're going to get there. It gives you a pathway. Who here has set an expectation for themselves and fallen short? Who here has failed to do something, right? Hopefully most of us. Failure by itself is actually not a bad thing at all. It's just our understanding of failure. But part of that is learning how to actually effectively create a plan of action. So I created a system. I like to call it the lean list because it sounds cool. On top of that, it's very simple. And we break it down into 3 categories. So we have red, yellow, green. Now, we're going to temporarily suspend our disbelief and assume that this is yellow. But these 3 categories are essentially our guideline for setting goals and creating plans. So our red category is what I want you guys to think about as your long-term goals. These are your dreams, your aspirations. These are kind of like the big ticket items, right? If you want to be a millionaire, that's a red goal because it's something that's achievable, but there isn't necessarily an immediate direction to get there. Now, if we talk about our yellow list, this is going to be your midterm goals. These are the things that I like to call stepping stones, right? The yellow goals are the things that actually allow you to build momentum towards these things, right? So if you want to be a millionaire, there are a bunch of different pathways to do it. Maybe you want to train to be a professional athlete. Maybe you want to start your own business, which also involves a bunch of other categories and aspects there. But whatever you're trying to do, whatever that big goal is, there have to be stepping stones along the way. There has to be pieces that allow you to actually figure out how to get here. Now, the last category, and this is going to be the most important one that I talk to you guys about. This is going to be your short-term goals. And this is also what I like to call daily, repeatable tasks. So, like I said, I have a chemistry degree. I also like physics. Does anybody, or is anyone familiar with the concept of inertia? Right? What this means is, to summarize, an object at rest will stay at rest unless an outside force acts on it, and an object in motion tends to stay in motion. If we are talking about goals or our forward progress instead of some object, the daily repeatable tasks or the things that you do on a consistent short-term basis are actually going to help you continue forward progress. And so I'm a big believer in momentum, positive and negative. And when I work with clients on goal setting, what I want them to understand is that if you're able to effectively create daily tasks or short-term goals, and you're able to check those things off on a regular basis, then that feeling of accomplishment is going to build. And that's going to allow you to actually make better progress long-term towards the things that you ultimately want to accomplish, right? Even if we take this, let's take this in the context of studying for an exam or an assignment or anything that you guys are doing in class, right? Now we have this, if we talk about like some type of final project. If you have this huge project to do, let's talk about a paper, for example, right? You're writing a big paper. If we break that paper up into subsequent pieces, meaning you have an introduction, you have a body, you have, you're working on getting your references in order, you're working on that page, you have some type of conclusion or afterward. If you break that big project up into smaller pieces, it becomes a little bit more manageable. And then if your daily repeatable task is that you're going to write 400 words a day, and you do that over time, it's much better than doing what I used to do in school and being like, oh, I got that paper due tomorrow. I should probably get on this, right? If you can chip away at this every day, ultimately this will make it a lot easier to accomplish those long-term goals. And so these are all pieces of the puzzle. Now, discipline is something that's very important. And this is where the magic happens. All of these tools are kind of like the lock where discipline is the key. And so I like putting this question out there. How many of you have recently done something that you knew was going to be difficult or that you were afraid of doing? Right, a handful of us. As human beings, we are programmed to chase happiness, comfort, pleasure, satisfaction, all that kind of stuff. And we're taught to actively avoid fear pain, discomfort, any of those type of things. But what I want you to understand is that discipline requires us to push ourselves a little bit closer to this end of the spectrum. And discipline is also the only reason that things ever work. So what is discipline? I define discipline as the ability to do what you know you should be doing when the alternatives seem like they're more fun or seem better. There's always that choice you have between studying or getting your homework done or watching that show on Netflix or maybe I'll get this done next time. I'd rather go out and hang out with my friends or do whatever. And I think that there's always space for those things, and that type of stuff is important. But discipline is the ability to actively turn away those kind of short-term fun things in lieu of that longer-term goal or that longer-term dream. If you guys have big goals here, and there are big things that you want to accomplish, which I certainly hope that there are, that's going to require a number of times where you have to make a choice between actually working towards this or not. If you want to be an athlete in some capacity, even if it's something as simple as, a lot of people say, I want to run the Boston Marathon. It's something that's important to me. That's here, and there are a lot of pieces that go into that. But how many times do you think somebody who's prepping for the Boston Marathon has to go out and run when it's raining or when it's cold or when the stars haven't aligned, they're a little bit sore, they're a little bit tired? If you want to be a millionaire, if you want to start your own business and make a ton of money, I'll be the first person to tell you that. There are going to be many nights where you stay up late. There are going to be many mornings where you get up early. There are going to be a lot of times where you have to put in work on that dream and on that goal. And the problem with, I don't want to say our society, that sounds really gloomy, but the problem with our reality is that we're programmed to avoid those things. We're programmed to avoid that struggle, to avoid that hardship, to avoid that difficulty. But just like I learned when I was getting beat up in wrestling, there's a direct correlation between how hard you're willing to work and the end result at the end of that tunnel. There's a direct correlation between how much you're willing to give up in the short term to achieve in the long term. So discipline is a long-term focused concept, but it involves short-term decisions, meaning you're thinking about something in the future, but the decisions that you're making when we're talking about discipline are all short-term. They're all daily, they're all weekly, they're all monthly. Today I'm going to choose to do this instead of this. Tomorrow I'm going to do this instead of this. I'm going to get up early. I'm going to get up before when my first alarm goes off instead of hitting snooze. I'm going to do something that scares me tomorrow. So these are short-term actions that have long-term implications. Discipline is the key to all of this stuff. And part of that requires actively being uncomfortable. So we talk about this spectrum, right? I want to be happy, I don't want to be sad. I want to be comfortable, I don't want to be uncomfortable. I want to sleep in a comfortable bed at night, I don't want to sleep on the ground. I want to be cozy and warm, I don't want to be freezing cold. These are all opposite ends of this spectrum, this dichotomy, if you will. But one of the key points here that I want you to understand is that this is not actually how it works. It ends up kind of being more like this. And this might not make sense at first, but if I'm able to push towards this end of the spectrum and get comfortable there, what I actually will find, and what you will actually find, is that it gets me a little bit closer to being ultimately happy, to being satisfied, to being content. If I'm able to overcome that hurdle of discomfort, almost immediately on the other side, you will find that there are things that make you happy, that make you comfortable, that make you satisfied, right? Who here has done something really, really hard and you finished and you had that feeling of accomplishment, right? Or you finished a really hard project, right? There aren't really a lot better feelings in the world, in my opinion, you may disagree, than doing something that took a lot of effort, that took a lot of time, that you worked really hard on, and then being able to present that thing and being able to finish that thing, right? Whether even if you played, if you played sports in high school, anybody who here played sports? Anybody still play sports? Right? A couple of us, right? What about prepping for a really hard game or a really hard match, right? You focus, you watch film, your practice sucks, your coach is running you into the ground, you guys are working hard for that thing. But how good does it feel when you actually win that game, or you beat your rival, or you accomplish that goal that you set out for yourself, right? And that all involves conceptualizing it here instead of here. It's not just I'm either happy or I'm uncomfortable. It's if I can get comfortable living here a little bit more, then I'm going to be much more likely to be satisfied, to be happy. So I like to tell this story about this concept. I had a client who came to me, wasn't super confident, kind of middle-aged individual. They wanted to get ready they were going to a high school reunion. So they were seeing a bunch of people that they hadn't seen in a number of years, and they just weren't super happy with where they were at that place in their life. They had become a little bit unhealthy. They weren't eating super well. They had just started getting back into working out and exercise, and they approached me, and they didn't really know what to do. And so, yes, we talked about physical training and nutrition and all that kind of stuff, but most of what we talked about was this. And I said, I promise you, if you're willing to adhere to a plan, if you're willing to commit yourself to this, if you're willing to be uncomfortable in the short term, we can completely change the way that you think about yourself. We can change your confidence. We can change your outlook. And this client did everything that I told her to do, followed a nutrition plan, followed a training plan, and we met regularly to talk about these mindset topics, to talk about the way that she was perceiving her effort and her progress. That same woman had her friend send me probably 20 pictures from the night of her high school reunion, in her dress that she bought specifically for the event, her smiling with her friends, her arm around everybody, happy, radiant, beaming, because she understood and learned that by being uncomfortable in the short term, she was able to finally be confident, be satisfied, be happy. And these are the kind of effects that you can have on the people you work with. If you're able to understand this concept, if you're able to push people just a little bit to being uncomfortable, and you're able to teach people that the key lies in discipline, the key lies in making yourself just a little bit uncomfortable on a daily basis, on a regular basis. And this is really the crux of all this, right? These daily repeatable tasks, if we're talking about setting goals, these can't be things that are necessarily easy to do, but I like to tell people to start with something small, start to build momentum. Now, this is going to be kind of a weird thing, but if you want a very easy way to start making progress in this direction, take a cold shower in the morning. Doesn't have to be long. Who here enjoys being in cold water? Hopefully nobody. If anybody does, you're kind of weird, right? But jump in a cold shower in the morning. Start with a minute. Just breathe. Or you can do one of these guys, right? The worst, by the way, is when you are facing the shower and then you turn around and it hits your back. Bad news bears. But start doing that. Try it. Try it for a week. See what happens. And it's such a stupid thing, such a small thing. But the people who have listened to me and done this, if you can take a cold shower in the morning, especially in the winter, especially when it's early, there's not a lot of other stuff in your morning that's going to be harder than that. There might be, but for the most part, that's probably going to be the worst thing that you do that morning. And what it does is it helps put things into context. It helps you understand that, well, I just took an ice cold shower for 2 minutes. I can handle that slightly annoying situation. Or it's going to make you more likely to check something off your to-do list. It's like, well, I just took a cold shower. I guess I'll send that email I've been wanting to send. And what I want you to understand is that this concept is super, super important. I like to talk to people about the 1%. Getting 1% closer, putting 1% more effort in, trying to do something 1% better. Because I think we can all agree that we know when you look in the mirror and you finish a project or you take an action or you do something, I think we can all agree that you know whether you gave 100% or 99. Do we understand the difference between 100% and 99? Meaning, maybe you proofread that paper one more time. Maybe you did that one extra rep if we're talking about practicing for sports. Maybe you read that one extra page to prepare to study for your exam. But I'm sure we can all find one example of where if you had read that one extra page, you would have got one more question right on the test. Or if you had done that one extra thing, the outcome would have been 1% better. And so what I want to encourage you to do is find those opportunities where you can add an extra percent to the effort that you're giving, where you can dial it up just that little bit, where you can go just that little bit extra. Because that is what's going to allow you over time to turn that 1% into 2, into 3, into 4, into 5. If you're able to consistently put more effort into what you do on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis, this concept will allow you over time to build that momentum, to get yourself closer to these goals. Once you start checking off this stuff, once you start getting through those stepping stones and knocking those things down, this stuff becomes a lot easier to accomplish, or conceptually a lot easier to accomplish. And a lot of people don't necessarily know what these things are, and that's okay. I always tell people to start in the middle. Set some short-term goals, or even start here. What are some things that you actually enjoy doing? What are things that you actually enjoy spending your time doing that are somewhat productive or moving you in a positive direction? And use that to conceptualize this. Use that to figure out what some of those stepping stones are. Because if you can figure out these pieces, a lot of times that will help you paint this picture a little bit more clearly. And I like to tell another story about a client I've worked with. We meet every week to talk about this stuff. He's in his 70s, and he joined a gym and started showing up. And I was like, all right, I don't know what to think about this guy yet. I'm going to observe him. And he kept showing up. And I didn't know how long he was going to keep showing up. But I said, okay, I'm just going to watch this guy. And he started coming to class. He started asking questions. And this guy had never exercised in his life before. He ran in high school, but at the time that he was coming up and running, there was no strength training. That wasn't a thing. People weren't doing this type of stuff. And so he walked into our gym. People are dropping weights. There's people grunting. 3 people probably had their shirt off in the corner. And this guy signed up. And in the back of my mind, I was like, you know what? This guy, there's something. If you're going to walk in here in your 70s and see that and sign up and take that step, there's something there. And so I watched. And I didn't know how long he was going to stay with us. But he kept showing up, kept taking class. Finally, he approached me and he said, Justin, I want to sit down with you. I said, all right, cool. Let's talk. He goes, I'm in my 70s, and I kind of like this stuff. And I want to be able to do this 20 years from now. And I was like, all right. This guy's in his 70s, and he wants to be able to work out in his 90s. That's pretty awesome, right? And so I said, all right, let's come up with a plan. Let's start to talk about this stuff. Most of what we talked about was these type of topics. I was like, all right, your homework for this week, I want you to start to think about how you react and respond to situations. I want you to start to think about what your mindset's like day to day. Now, aside from putting himself in this situation where he's in an uncomfortable environment, he's jumping into the gym. This guy also runs his own business. He works in a high-stress environment. So he's constantly dealing with things during the day that can easily derail him from a positive mindset. And so I just said, hey, start to become aware of this stuff. Let's start to set some goals. What do you want to do? And he came to me and he told me, he's like, I want to decrease my 440 time. So now we compete in the 400-meter run. When this guy was running, it was the 440. Completely different event, right? I didn't even know that was a thing. So I was like, all right, what's the 440? He's like, that's what we used to run. So he wanted to run a 440 that was like almost the same speed as when he was coming up. And I was like, all right, cool, let's do it. So he started literally hitting the track every Sunday. And he would come in and meet with me. And he was like, I tried to do a lot of running, but I was tired, whatever. I'm like, that's fine. I'm not surprised you're tired. You're running hard. And he started building that up. So we started setting these goals. We started saying, all right, this week we're going to get this much faster. We're going to do a little bit more. We're going to do one more run or one more rep or one more set. Or we're going to try to cut your rest time a little bit, whatever. So we laid out a plan. And the most profound thing that came out of all of this is that we started talking less and less about exercise and exercise-related goals. And he started telling me about all the positive ripple effects that it had in the rest of his life. He started having a better relationship with his kids and his grandkids. He started seeing them more often. He started having better conversations. He told me that in meetings at work, instead of jumping in and correcting people where he normally would do that, he started sitting back. He started letting other people's opinion come through. And what he actually found was by being aware of how he normally handles these situations and getting a better understanding of this type of stuff in a work environment, he was actually able to increase the cohesion of his team at work. They started having more effective meetings. They started being more productive as a company, all because he was able to get a better understanding of these things for himself. His business started doing better. His fitness improved. His mindset improved. And this is a guy in his 70s who started to implement this stuff and noticed an immediate difference. And so I tell that story for a number of reasons. One, because I want you to understand the power of some of this stuff, but I also want you to understand that you guys are perfectly situated to start to incorporate some of these concepts in your life. You guys are in the ideal situation to start to set meaningful goals, to start to put this stuff into context for yourself, to start to think about the things that you want to do and you want to accomplish. And I was sitting in the same seat as you guys not too long ago, and it's hard to figure out where we want to go or where we want to be. But what I want you to understand is that there are countless opportunities if you start to just think about this stuff, if you start to get your feet wet a little bit, try something, see if you liked it, see how it went, see if you enjoy it. Start to set goals based on the things that you gravitate towards or the things that you spend your time doing. And this is the same type of stuff that you're going to be able to ultimately use with clients who you work with, people who you interact with. I know we have a lot of exercise science people, we have people from other fields, business, nutrition, all that kind of stuff. This stuff applies everywhere universally. But the most important piece of all of this is that it doesn't work externally until it first works internally. Until you start to apply this stuff for yourself, it's not going to work with anybody else. Until you start to actually set goals yourself and understand this stuff yourself, you're not going to be able to apply it with clients. You're not going to be able to help other people. And until you start to become aware of your own feelings, your own emotions, your own thoughts, you're not going to be able to help other people do the same thing. And I encourage you to start actively doing things that you don't want to do. Start small, take a minute cold shower, make sure you turn around, right? Get up a little bit earlier. Don't snooze your alarm that one extra time. Maybe do a workout. So I don't like telling people that fitness or exercise is the only way to do this, but what I do find is that because the mind and body are so interrelated, there aren't a lot of more effective ways to make this stuff happen quickly than through exercise. Do a workout that involves things that you hate to do. If you're like me when I was a kid and on the soccer field, I didn't want to run. Doesn't have to be a lot. Just put your shoes on and make it happen. Just by taking that action or taking that step, you're actually changing the chemistry in your brain. There have been a lot of neuroscience studies done to show that the way that our brain communicates, meaning the way that our neurons actually fire and interact, changes based on the thoughts that you have. They've done CT scans of people who are in a supportive environment, positive environment, who generally think positive thoughts, and they've done CT scans of people who are in a negative or hostile environment. And the brain activity in those two people is different. And that is just based on the thoughts that they repeatedly have and the actions that they repeatedly take. There's actual science and brain chemistry to show that doing this stuff will change the way that your brain appears on a CT scan. Everything that happens in your body is controlled by this. That's just physiology. That's just what happens. And so if you can actually change your brain chemistry first, how much easier do you think it's going to be to change your physiology, change your body, right? And this is a concept that is incredibly important to understand. I don't think a lot of people actually process or understand the magnitude of this. And it all boils down to, out of everything that I talked about, this. If you don't remember anything, remember the smiley face and the sad face in this line. Remember that, if nothing else makes sense. Because if you don't have this, none of this stuff actually works. A lot of people ask me about motivation and all this kind of stuff. How do you get motivated? How do you actually stay motivated to do this stuff? And the one point I like to make in that regard is discipline is like the gasoline for the engine that is everything happening in your body and your brain. Motivation is like rocket fuel. Who here got super excited the last time they started a new project or did something that they were happy about? Anybody get super motivated to show of hands? Anybody? You start a new project, you do something fun, maybe you undertake some new hobby. That motivation is rocket fuel to get you started. The first couple weeks are easier, the first couple days are easier. Like, oh, this is awesome. Or you set a New Year's resolution. Anybody set New Year's resolutions? We got that coming up? Right? Set a New Year's resolution. I'm going to do this. And you crush it for like a week. And then after that, it's like, I got some other stuff to do, or I got this to do, or I got that to do. That's motivation. That's rocket fuel. It gets you going. Gets you going at the beginning. It's very easy to adhere to that plan at the beginning. From there, discipline is the actual gasoline that runs the engine. If you can't develop this and you can't cultivate this, then once that rocket fuel runs out, so too do your dreams, do your motivations, do your aspirations, do your goals. Understand that you have to regularly become uncomfortable. You have to regularly build inertia and build momentum. And once you do that, once you get comfortable with that, you're actually going to find that you gain more happiness, you gain more comfort, you gain more satisfaction from a lot of the other pieces in your life. Because how much cooler would it be 10 years from now, if you want to be a millionaire, to actually be a millionaire, if you want to be an athlete, to actually be an athlete? The cool thing about time is it's going to pass no matter what. So you can either spend your time staying in the same spot, doing nothing, or as that time passes anyways, you can start to implement some of these things. You can start to do one thing a day that scares you. You can start to do one thing a day that you don't want to do. And then when that time passes, because it inevitably will, next thing you know, you're a little bit closer to here than you were a few days ago, a few weeks ago, a few months ago, a few years ago. So in summary, right, I'm just a kid who got beat up wrestling practice. I didn't want to run. I didn't like sports. I was probably the last person who, if you looked at, you would ever guess to actively do these type of things. But what I have found in life, and what I've found with working with people, and what I've found from my experience, is that the more uncomfortable you can get, the more discipline you can develop, the more you can become aware of your thoughts and your reactions, and the better goals that you can set, and you can put all this stuff in context, the more likely you are to succeed. There's a direct correlation between hard work and success. If you ask any entrepreneur, for those of you business people in here, if you study any entrepreneur, nobody got there overnight. Nobody got there by accident. People are successful because they consistently do the things that other people around them don't want to do. You should find little ways every day that you can challenge yourself. And if you do that consistently over time, I promise you, you will be able to set more meaningful goals. You'll be able to accomplish more meaningful things. And once you can do that in your life, you guys are poised to have an incredibly positive impact on the lives of countless people doing what you're doing. You guys are in the best position to affect people's lives because you're going to be able to work with people in the most intimate way. People are the most vulnerable when they come to you for exercise, for nutrition, when they come to you for health. That is a vulnerable state for people to be in. It's difficult for them to take that step. And so what I want you to understand is that more so than some doctors, than some nurses, than some of these other health care practitioners, you guys have an incredible opportunity to directly impact the lives of others in a positive way at that ground level, at their most vulnerable, before bad things happen, before they need these other people. You guys can make that positive impact. And a lot of that boils down to understanding how to develop not just the body, not just use these physical tools that you guys have gained in class, but how to use these mental tools, how to develop the mind, how to develop that and direct that to more positively influence the physical side of things. Make sense? Awesome.